Okay, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us today for this beautiful conversation that has been put together by Duende District Bookstore and who the Word is very excited to partner with in doing so. My name is Vinayaka Prasad. I am the Executive Director of the Word. If you aren't familiar with our organization, definitely check out our website for a little bit more information. We are a nonprofit that is fighting for equity through the literary arts. And we have a lot of fighting to do. But if there are any writers in the room with us today, I do want to let you know about a couple of resources that are available right now. One is that we have our editor-writer mentorship taking applications right now. This is really one of our most incredible things that we get to do, which is that we get to pair upcoming writers who have a completed but unpublished manuscript with a very experienced editor in the publishing industry to get feedback on that full manuscript. And it's really been an incredible journey. Every single year, we see amazing things come out of it. People's work changes, people's work gets published sometimes. It's really incredible things. So please do check that out. And also there are a number of resources on the website really specifically to uplift voices from the margins. And so we hope that we can share those with you, and it's our continued privilege to be able to do that. And I'm going to shoot it over now to Angela Maria Spring of Duende District Books to get us started. Thank you everyone for joining us.
Thank you so much, Vinayaka. We are always so delighted to partner with you. And really, this is a really wonderful opportunity. It was Lupita. Lupita was the one who brought this to us, and we were so excited to have this. So again, I'm Angela Maria Spring, the owner of Duende District. We are a collaborative pop-up bookstore by and for people of color where all are welcome. And just our mission is that, Duende District is about the collective, the community, and creation and decolonization of literary spaces by and for people of color. And we are so excited to welcome you all this evening for this really special conversation between Jennifer De Leon, author of the essay collection White Space, and the always brilliant Lupita Aquino of Lupita Reads on Bookstagram. And Lupita and Jen will talk, and then we'll open it up to audience questions. And we do hope that you'll purchase this book with Duende District to help keep us going, especially during the pandemic. Even the smallest purchases mean the world to us. And I cannot say that, with more emphasis. It's all you, we're able to do this because of the generosity and support of our community. And that I'm just so eternally grateful. It's been, I know, a really tough year for all of us. And we're gonna get through it. So thank you for that. And once again, I want to thank again our friends at the Word. And I appreciate all of that. So let's get on to the main event. So a little bit about our guest tonight. Jennifer De Leon is the author of the young adult novel Don't Ask Me Where I'm From and the essay collection White Space, Essays on Culture, Race, and Writing, an assistant professor of creative writing at Framingham State University and a faculty member in the MFA in Creative Nonfiction program at BIPOC University. She has published prose in dozens of literary journals such as Iowa Review, Brevity, Guernica, and more, and is a Grub Street instructor and board member. So you definitely should learn more about her work and visit her at jenniferdeleonauthor.com or follow her at JDELEONWRITER, and I think she's on Twitter and Instagram. And then the queen of Bookstagram, is a clinical. She's gonna laugh. We're like,
I am.
That's right, Lorena. Lupita is a clinical research professional by day and bookstagrammer by night. She is the co-founder and current moderator for Lit on 8th Street Book Club at Solid State Books. So we thank our friends at Solid State for constantly helping. She's on on loan to Duende. She's a passionate reader, amplifying and highlighting books written by authors of color through her Instagram and blog. And when she's not reading, you can find her spending the day with her wife and son at a local independent bookstore. She currently lives in Maryland, and you can find her on Instagram at lupita.reads and on Twitter at Lupita. Is that hyphen? Reads?
It's an underscore.
Yeah. Or underscore.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah, no, they need to know where to find you, Lupita. And then you can definitely catch her wonderful column at the Washington Independent Review of Books. So a warm welcome to you both. And Lupita, take it away.
I just want to say thank you so much, Angela, and thank you so much to the Word for hosting this and creating space for us to have these conversations that personally as a reader, like I get so much from, and I think other readers like us and that want to build community through literature get the same. So thank you. Seriously, thank you so much for doing this for us. It's greatly appreciated. And Jen, thank you so much to you for doing this with me. How are you?
I'm great. This is my honor. You know, I'm a total fangirl, and like every time I see Lupita,
Same.
yeah. So it's really my honor. Thank you.
Yeah, and I'm so glad that we get to do this with your collection. We got to talk briefly with through the PG library system about your YA novel. So I'm really glad we get to do this again. And so for anyone new, do you want to go ahead and kick us off with a reading from your new collection?
Yeah, definitely. So this is White Space, Essays on Culture, Race, and Writing. And it's an essay collection that deals with many themes, immigration, identity, language, fitting in, and also white space refers to the white spaces that I've been a part of my whole life, growing up in the suburb of Boston, and then going to college in Connecticut, going through graduate school, all of that. But then it also has to do with the white space of the page and learning to slowly claim the white space of the page and my identity as a writer and an author in predominantly white spaces in writing and publishing. The book also centers on my trip to Guatemala when I was in my late 20s. So the essays are basically organized by stories before my trip, during my trip, and then after I came back home to Boston. And I thought I would read a self-contained piece that is called A Map of the World. And just to set up some context, when I was growing up, I was born in Boston and I grew up again in a suburb of Boston. And both my parents were born and raised in Guatemala. And I grew up hearing so many stories about this country, and we would go and visit. And we had relatives come and visit us in Boston. It was just such a part of my upbringing. And my father was always homesick for his homeland. You know, I understood that, like I got that. But when I was in 9th grade, he just sort of had it with living in the United States. And he hit a breaking point and actually decided to leave. And he got in a car and drove to Guatemala. And actually, it's funny because you're in DC. It was around DC that he turned around and he came back home. And we never talked about it. But of course, it was baked into my upbringing and the story of my family. And anyway, so fast forward years later, and I'm living in Guatemala, and I'm studying at a language school in Quetzaltenango, which is in the western part of the country in the highlands. And there's a very small library, and there's a woman who works there. And one day she just came up to me and just kind of shared her story. And so this is the piece that I wrote about that experience, and it's called A Map of the World. When I was in 9th grade, my father ran away from home. One frostbitten New England morning, he climbed into his gray Toyota and drove toward Guatemala. He left a letter for us written in blue pen on a single sheet of my school notebook paper. Somewhere around DC, he turned back. I have always wondered how his life and mine would be different had he kept driving. His longing has haunted me ever since. It is why I am here in Guatemala, living day to day, page to page. I want to understand how my father could possibly love a country more than his family. I am sitting in a library in the Western Highlands. Tattered spines of paperbacks line the locked doors of the wooden bookshelves. Paulo Freire, Rigoberta Menchú, John Updike's Rabbit Run. The library is one room with 3 square wooden tables, and posted on the white wall, a map of the world. It is an upside down map. North America is in the southern hemisphere. Australia trades places with Europe. A window the size of a door places afternoon light in clean strips across the cool tiles. Outside, clouds cast shadows over the mountains. The one librarian's name is Aracelis. She is rosy-cheeked and wears a pearl white sweater with a fur collar. Her black hair is thick and long like mine. She hovers over my desk, examines the black marks I have scribbled between the thin tan lines in my leather-bound journal. She leans in. My shoulders tense. I have seen her before. I return to this library like I return to this country over and over. But today, it's as if my face has a sign that reads, "Tell me your story." My father lives in the United States, in Arkansas City. And when I was 3, he left Guatemala to work. But he always called and said he had gifts for us, my mother, my sister, and well, my father, for me, he was just everything, hope, a hero, until one day when it was my sister's birthday and we had the cake ready, the food, everything, and the telephone rings, and it's him. All this, she tells me, in one long black hair of a sentence. She talks with her hands and her eyes dart left to right. She speaks as if we'd penciled this conversation in our calendar weeks ago, like she'd been practicing it while walking along the narrow, cracked sidewalks in the pink light of sunrise and the orange light of sunset. So, he says, look, I'm only calling to say that I have another family now. I don't love you anymore, and I'm not returning. Aracelis and I both nod, me side to side, and she up and down. I didn't want to say anything to my sister, so I waited until my mother asked me what was wrong. I had to tell her. My mother sat down and cried, then my grandparents, my sister, and me. Maybe he was lying, I say. Sometimes life is hard in the US. People can't find work. A man can feel like a failure. No. Aracelis pulls down her sweater. After that, I didn't want to have anything to do with him. Yo sufrí. I even had to go to the hospital, yes. Through the window, I spot an old man pushing a rickety wagon full of empty gas tanks. The shade from his cowboy hat hides his face. The high sun has moved its attention to another latitude, another longitude. Seated at the wooden table, I want to cry. Not for Aracelis, not for her father, but for mine. He could not do what other men did, my father, who has been homesick for 40 years. And yet, a feeling of gratitude swarms me. Thank God he didn't have the guts. Thank God my father came back, and that I, his daughter, can relish the warmth of both sons. That is what I felt as I listened to Aracelis that afternoon in the library, when I stared long and hard at the upside-down map.
I don't know if you can hear me clapping, but I also don't want to be too loud.
Thank you.
No, it's so great to be able to hear you and hear you read. And, you know, I feel like as a reader, you connect to the words that you read in your head, and then connecting to what the author sounds as they're reading is a little magical. I always feel like.
Yeah.
So I do want to go back to the title. I'm so glad that you mentioned that, you know, it has to do with white spaces, but also related to your father and what you just read. There is like a personal experience you had with him that you write about in one of your essays, basically about writing his resume and the white spaces. And could you just, you know, kind of expand on that for us?
Yeah, it's funny because that's actually the origin of the essay collection. Thank you, Jenny. Basically, it was Thanksgiving years ago, and I was about to leave, and my father asks me, like, I have my coat like over my shoulders, I'm ready to leave, and he says, hey, you know, I got to write this resume. Can you help me? And I'm like, what are you talking about? Like, he's never had a resume. My family didn't really have computers, like all this stuff. So anyway, I help him write his first resume ever. And at the time, he's 57 years old. So it's one of the essays in the piece. It's called The White Space. And I entered it into a contest with Fourth Genre. And it won the Michael Steinberg Essay Prize in 2012. And that really gave me a push, you know, like it was motivation to send out more essays because what I wrote about in this essay is something that I had never written about. And And that's my father and his longing for Guatemala and his limited, quote unquote, work experience and life experience, because a resume is just one fraction of your life. And the occasion of helping him write it that night allowed me to reflect on the white space of his resume and the white space of his life, like all that isn't on this one-page document. And so once I wrote that and submitted it and it was accepted, I felt like I got the green light. Like, I'm just going to write about my family and things I want to write about, because up until then I had sort of been, you know, doing that thing where I felt like I was trying to write pieces that were like literary and that like would, you know, be in the New Yorker or something. But like, I never even submitted to the New Yorker, so I don't even know what I'm talking about. But, you know, it's like this like kind of like pressure. Yeah, there's so much to say. That's
no, and you know, I think that there's that societal pressure of like, no, like the New Yorker's known, right? And like everyone knows the New Yorker, and so that's the standard of what we think is literary, but it's not always, right? There's plenty of writers creating outside of spaces that aren't necessarily accessible to writers that look like us or that want, you know, I'm calling myself a writer, but I only write about books.
But I feel like you're in our community.
And, you know, I'm so glad that you got that and that you said that. But, you know, I was thinking one thing that I immediately thought after finishing your collection, I was struck by the fact that you started the book, and for those that haven't read it, with someone that is a family member, Yolanda. You started writing about her, and then you also end the book with a student that is Patricia. And so, you know, I was just curious if it was intentional, first of all, and also if you were writing towards exploring a potential thread that ties them together, but also you in their life and the way you interact. I thought that was beautiful.
Oh, thank you so much. You know, I think so highly of you and your opinion. And I really was like, right when I sent you the arc, I was like, I hope she likes it. Like, you really like, you want to feel like you're connecting with readers who you're writing the book for, you know? And for me, like, this book is really one that I'm like, oh my God, I want this to be one that other Latina readers are able to identify with. And you know, not every essay or every page or every sentence, you know, but enough so that people feel like their stories are somehow validated or at least elevated. So I did not do that intentionally, starting with Yolanda and ending with Patricia. But I think what I do like to do is use stories, like other people's narratives, as a way to ask questions about my own life and kind of use as part of a braid, right? And so like in the piece with Yolanda, I'm reflecting on Yolanda, but also my mother and the women in my family and kind of the stories we keep close to the chest and ones we share, and advice and dichos that we give out. And then in the end with Patricia, it was really a braid of Patricia's story, my story, her mother, my mother. So I guess it's like a 4-part braid. But anyway, I like writing about other people. I feel like it's important to bring their stories into the mix.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm the same way. You know, I think I seek to find myself in stories, but also I think a lot of it is not having the language, right? When you've experienced something. So when you read someone else's experience that's similar to yours, there's these connections, at least in my brain, that kind of fire off like ping pongs.
Yeah. I'm dying to ask you, like, what, if I can ask you, you know, like what was one connection you had, or what was one moment where you had those kind of like.
Yeah, well, I was going to reveal that later, but there was plenty of connections. But I think one that struck the most was just, you know, being in spaces that are predominantly white. I grew up in, I don't know if anyone knows or joining us, is in Kensington, Maryland, which is predominantly white. And, you know, I think there was not a lot of people that looked like me, you know, and so that's something that I really connected to. And also, of course, you know, my parents and them being immigrants. And I mean, there was a lot there, you know, being a first generation college student. I mean, I literally, Jen, was like, click, click, click.
That's great.
Yeah.
That makes
So,
me happy.
yeah, there was a lot there. There was a lot there. But, you know, I do want to ask you more about Yolanda. And so in that particular essay was something that really struck me, was that you had like this epiphany related to her and your parents and your relatives. And I don't think I'm giving too much away by sharing the epiphany, but it was that, you know, it occurred to you that they hadn't moved from Guatemala just as a wanderlust thing to come here to the US. And then, you know, it wasn't until you removed yourself from being close to them that you were actually able to process that and see their stories away from them. So, you know, I just was wondering if you could, you know, just talk about how the distance allowed you to see them in a different light and write about them.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it probably wasn't until, well, I should say, like, growing up, I had this general understanding that my parents moved to the United States for a better opportunity. Like, I had that kind of somewhere in the back of my mind, like, okay, more education, more job opportunities, etc. But it was after college when I moved to California, to the Bay Area. I lived in San Jose, and I was getting my master's at University of San Francisco. And it was the first time, even though I had studied abroad in college, like kind of all over the world, but this was the first time I was living across the country, you know, for a couple of years. And it was at that point I realized, when I met so many of I taught elementary school, when I met so many of my students and their families who were mostly from Mexico or Vietnam, they shared their stories, and it really made me reflect on my parents' stories. Like, oh, wait, people move and emigrate because something isn't working in their current home. And it's a pressure. It's something that's that's pushing them out. And without that force, without that pressure, like, why leave? Like, who would want to leave their home? And in college, every time somebody was like, oh, yeah, you know, we lived in Mexico for a summer because my dad was doing PhD research. You know, it just was a very different context where we ski in France or whatever. And it's like, that's nice. You know, my parents, we didn't do that. But, you know, anyway, it made me reflect on like the whys behind emigration.
Right. Yeah. And what, you know, did you find any difficulties in writing into the whys, like any obstacles that you had to overcome? You know, I think a lot about processing and how sometimes if you're not ready for it, you know, and it comes, how did you manage to say, okay, I'm here?
Yeah, it took a long time. I mean, because for so long, I admittedly was trying to fit in by trying to assimilate. And I wish I could go back in time and, you know, just kind of like tell myself, like, no, I just got my vaccine, so I just hurt my shoulder. But anyway, you know, it's kind of like, I wish I could go back and say, don't try to fit in. Try to walk into yourself and become who you are. And, you know, when you're growing up, it's, at least for me, I felt this immense pressure to want to be like the other girls in my grade and the other kids in my town. And I learned very early on that meant trying to be white, you know, and dressing preppy and doing all the things that they did that were rooted in whiteness, you know, just kind of, I didn't have the language for it and I didn't have the understanding, but I think part of that made me in some ways repress what was different and unique about myself. And it wasn't until later, well into my 20s, that I felt like, you know what, it's time. Like, I'm tired. I'm tired of trying to fit in and do all the things and straighten my hair and diet and you know, try to write that way, like, and try to pretend I'm laughing at the joke when I don't know what you're talking about. You know, it's very exhausting to code switch constantly. And I just kind of started to write a little bit more authentically. And it was a long process. And I write about that in the essays here too, you know, to becoming an author. I quit a lot of times. It's so hard being the only one in those spaces.
And not just the only one, but like the first in your family to do something that is, I think that our family and people in our community, also any, I think, immigrant family would see as a risk almost, right?
Totally. Oh, yeah. Yeah, my mom still, like, now she feels comfortable, but there were so many conversations where she would ask me, you know, what page are you on in my novel, you know, and for her, it was like she thought she could like cheerlead me to the end, like to the finish line. Like, yeah. And it's like, it's not like that. You might write 400 pages and throw them away. And or in my case, go out with a novel, an adult novel, and it doesn't sell. And that was devastating. It really felt like a punch in the gut. But I didn't give up. I kept going. And I tell my students this, you know, it's not a race. It's not who gets there the fastest. It's the person who doesn't give up. And that's ultimately, I think, what happened. I just refused to give up.
Yeah, and in terms of, you know, I get the sense from your collection that it has been written pieces over a long time, and so yeah, I am curious, like, in terms of your YA novel, like, where did that all fit in together as you were writing it?
Yes, it's a perfect example of the mystery, like you had talked about the magic of reading, and there is a magic and mystery in just the process. Like, you can't control many parts of this profession, I guess. And I didn't set out to write an essay collection. I wrote that essay, The White Space, and for the title of this collection, I decided to drop the, so it's just called White Space. Mm-hmm. But anyway, it started with that. I kept writing essays. I love the essay form. And I wasn't thinking, oh, I'm going to put these in a book. I just was, they were sort of like one-offs, like, and I would write one, submit it, work on another one, submit it, maybe some at the same time, many pots on the stove. All the while I was getting my MFA in fiction, working on an adult novel. And when that one didn't sell, I thought maybe I can cobble these essays together. Maybe it's a collection, but it wasn't there yet. And I faced the blank page, blinking cursor, but I did get a fellowship to write a young adult novel. And so I had 9 months at the Boston Public Library. It's this amazing residency by the Associates of the Boston Public Library. And there I wrote my YA novel. And that one just kind of came out. And start to finish, it took less than 2 years to write it. And then we sold it, and then I revised it some more. But this essay collection, I mean, is 10 years in the making. Wow. I didn't work on it every day. And again, I didn't know it was an essay collection until later. And then I had my writing group give amazing feedback and kind of help me figure out, well, what's holding it together and what can you augment in other pieces? What's missing? What doesn't belong? But I'd love to write another one. You know, there's so many essays that aren't in here. Like, it's crazy.
I was going to ask you about that. That was going to be my next question. Like,
oh, really? Yeah.
How did you decide? You know, I'm sure that, and you know, as you were reading them and piecing them together, I'm sure that it might have inspired more things, right?
Yes.
How did that go?
I mean, there are so many stories. I just felt like, okay, I'm going to put these essays in this container, and this is a collection that is mostly about writing and culture and identity, and it's hinging on my trip to Guatemala. So that felt like complete. There's so many stories that I could put in another essay collection about motherhood, about colorism, about being a Latina professor, you know, tenure track professor. Like there's so many more. And then even from my childhood, there are other stories that I didn't include in here. One's about going to work with my mother. She was a housekeeper for years, and I remember going with her to clean houses, and she was like, you know, don't touch anything, don't eat anything. And like if I played with the board games or the dolls, I had to put them back exactly where I had found them. And so there was this one house that she cleaned, and the little girl was my age, and she had this doll house that was, to me, it was like everything.
Right.
You know, and it's like, I just remember playing with all the little furniture. I couldn't believe, like, the little spoons. And the house was an exact replica of their house. So they had it custom made. I just was so fascinated by that. And then I made my own out of cardboard and shoe boxes and stickers. And it was like this kind of like, you know, like I'm like, what's that about? I don't even know. As I'm telling you, like, what is that about? If I peel the onion, you know, what?
Yeah.
There's something there I don't know. But that's where writing comes into play. Like, you have to meet the story halfway on the page. So yeah, so I have lots more that I want to write.
No, and I love knowing that because, you know, my mom also was a housekeeper who I would go with her to houses, and like some of my favorite memories were, you know, just sitting around watching her, helping her shine, you know, shine things like silver. And like as a kid, it just makes me like insanely to think about now as an adult how I knew how to shine like silver. Even though we didn't own any silver.
Oh, yeah.
Like,
oh, my God. You're making me want to write this essay. That's good.
It's a useless skill. Like, there should be an essay written about useless skills that, you know, like, I don't own any silver now. You know,
no, like, no, I remember, like, if I watch TV, she was like, you know, put the remote, like, put it back to the channel that they were watching because.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, like she was so smart. She is so smart, you know, but she knew like if they come home, se ponen a ver la tele, you know, they're going to want the news and say, what are these caricaturas? Why is Tom and Jerry on here? She was just always thinking.
Well, it's funny because, yeah, I mean, my mom was the same. She wouldn't let me touch anything. She would sit me somewhere. Like, I have this memory of, like, literally sitting on steps, and she would sing to me as she's cleaning. And I would, like, to keep me entertained, because I'd be like, I want to go home. I don't want to be here, you know? So.
Oh, my God, that image. Yeah.
Yeah, so, but I got carried away anyway.
No, I know. That's what stories do, yeah.
Yeah, no, and I, you know, I think there's so much value in telling those stories, you know, and processing through them.
Yes.
You know, which is something, like I said, I think every individual comes to a point where they might be ready to write about it, and some people, you know, might not. So
yeah, and I think it has to do with so many things, right? But definitely with seeing yourself on the page, because hopefully today, if you know, a young Latina wants to write this story or these essays, etc., they feel like there are some books that they can go to and say like, oh, okay, she did it, I could do it, you know. But I know we've talked about this before, but it's really sad how few books we read and had access to written by Latina authors when we were growing up. And I do think it's different now. There's a lot more work to be done, but it's just, if it was an uphill battle now, maybe now it's kind of a rocky path. I don't know.
Yeah.
Metaphor, but yeah.
And I'm curious about that too, because I'm glad you brought it up. I know I listened to an interview and I was, again, stunned at the similarity that, you know, you had mentioned you didn't read your first book that featured or centered a Latina character until you were in college, which is the same thing as me. And, you know, I always sit back and think like, why did it take so long? You know?
Yes. I mean, so what was that book for you?
So that book for me was So Far From God, and by Ana Castillo. And I didn't get it through school. I actually was part of a Mexican folklore dance group in DC. And so there was a woman there who was part of the group too. And she was a big avid reader. She was finding herself
Yeah.
So she was like half Mexican, half white. And so she had all the Chicana lit. And she was like the person that took me to go see Frida Kahlo in the museum for the first time. And she was the one that introduced me to that book. So had it not been for her, I don't think that it would have been intuitive for me to know or even look for, or, and how about you?
Yeah, I mean, it was House on Mango Street by Sandra Cisneros, and it was my freshman year in college, and it was an English course. I think it was like a multicultural literature course. So we read Richard Wright, Sandra Cisneros, other books, well, Toni Morrison. So it was a great course, and I remember reading it and thinking like, oh, wow, there are words in Spanish in here. It felt like the writer was getting away with something, I'm like, how can she do this? It just felt so familiar. It's what Walter Dean Myers calls like the shock of recognition, of seeing yourself on the page in that way. And it came at a great time, because my freshman year, first semester, fall, I remember struggling a lot. There were high moments. I loved college in general. I had friends, all that. But that first semester, there were moments where I really was like, I'm taking the next Greyhound bus home. I'm not doing this. It just was really hard. Everybody else, it seemed, had gone to boarding school and had a laptop and was wearing Patagonia and North Face. And I just felt like I didn't get the memo, and that book saved me in that way. It made me feel like, maybe you do belong here. And that professor was really great. She really was. So it does kind of, like you said, like that woman who introduced you to that book by Ana Castillo. It's like, sometimes it can be that simple and that sacred, it opens a door kind of to other books. And now you're a bookstagrammer. I mean, think about that, right? Like
it was bound to happen. No, I'm kidding.
But that's a cool story. Like that's kind of the genesis maybe for you. I don't know.
Yeah, no, I think about that a lot. Because had it not been for her, in So Far from God, there wasn't just seeing yourself in words in Spanish for me. It was like the queer element, It legit, like I'll never forget reading a line, and it's so subtle, but it legit felt like it just gave me the possibility. It's just like it breathed air into me, and I was like, wow, like this is who I am. Like this is who I can be.
Yes. And that is another essay I have yet to write. My sister, it took her years. She lives in Texas, to come out of the closet, and it's amazing because we grew up in the same house, only 3 years apart. And it's like, I didn't know, you know what I mean? And we were all obsessed with the New Kids on the Block. And it was like, you're going to marry Danny and I'm going to marry Joe. And it's wild to me that
you didn't know.
Yeah. And that's the whole story. She was so afraid to tell my parents, and I'm telling her story here on the internet, but I'm going to write about her eventually anyway. And the thing is, she put it off for so long, and then she came home to try and my mother knew, my other sister knew. We were very supportive, and then she was like, I have to tell Dad, and she flew home to tell him. And it was a long weekend. The whole weekend passed. She didn't say anything. And we kept waiting and waiting and waiting. And finally, Monday came and we drove her to the airport. And we're kind of like, are you going to tell him? And we stopped for lunch. And at lunch, we're waiting. It was like holding your breath. And for 4 days. And then they head to the airport and she never told him. And then the day after, it's a long story, but I'll just tell you that my mother told him, and he started crying, and my mother was like, ¿Por qué estás llorando? Like, why are you crying? And he said, I can't believe that my daughter was suffering, and I didn't know, and I didn't like. For my parents, it's like there's nothing we could do.
Oh, that's beautiful.
And I know that's not the case for everybody. So I don't mean to like say it like, but what I mean is there are stories that we write in our fear, in our anxiety kind of about what a potential situation might be. And we tell them over and over and over again in our mind that they feel real. And so when that narrative is disrupted, it feels like fiction, and so there's so much to say about that. And then, both my parents walked her down the aisle, and her wife. And I think if there are more stories like that in books and in literature and in the world, then maybe other people will feel like, oh yeah, that's how it is. It's like, so I don't know if I'm making sense, but
no, you totally are. You totally
okay.
are. No, and to be fair, I think when I was going through it, my brother didn't know, and we're 2 years apart, right? And I was talking to family, and a close cousin of mine he's 10 years apart. He was so upset with me, and he was like, I just wanted to be able to celebrate you. And, and you're right in that the fact that sometimes you're so afraid and you're so worried that, you won't be accepted, or that, somebody will say something mean to you, which is a lot of what I had thought to myself. And, you do miss out on the ability to let people embrace who you are.
Right. Yeah, that's what she said at her wedding. She got all these messages from family all over the world, like, really? Like, what? Why did it take so long and everything? But everybody's on their own path, and
and it's not always that easy too, right? So,
right. Yeah.
So we got carried away. I'm sorry. I know Q&A is coming up. So if anybody has any questions, please feel free to ask them, and I will read them to Jen for you. But before we do that, I do want to ask about Guatemala, which is like literally like a character in this collection, and like it just feels like so amazing and inspiring to know that you were able to go back and like get to know it on your own, outside of the stories that you hear from your parents and the history that you have there. And so I wanted to say that it's super inspiring. And I also wanted to know, like, in what ways it really just propelled you more into writing and working on this collection. And
yeah. Oh, it's such a beautiful question. Thank you for asking that. I mean, because it is at the crux of the book, and it's at the center of my identity. That trip, when I went, I was 28. And so it was a point in my life called Saturn's Return, or the Return of Saturn. And it's a point in your life where you're kind of figuring things out and making a break from your day-to-day life and disrupting that. And I knew deep down that I wanted to go to Guatemala, but I was afraid. And so once I took that plunge, I just felt like, oh my God, it was exactly what I needed to be doing when I needed to be doing it. It was joyous and amazing and incredible, and also really hard at times. And it honestly made me ask more questions rather than get answers. So I wrote the entire time I was there. I didn't write what I thought was like a finished novel and all of that, but I wrote in my journal every single day that I was there, and I filled books. I didn't call them books, but now I know that they can be, it's like collecting the wool or something, and then you spin it and then sew it. I don't know. But it was important for me to go, and then I went back, and my husband and I got married there, and we can't wait to take our boys there. We were going to go last March, like the day before the pandemic hit. We had our suitcases packed, everything, so we'll have to wait. But I know that I want them to have their own relationship with this country, and have it nuanced in their own way. But Guatemala is not something that we read about often enough. It's not in books, even inside or under the canopy of Latinx literature. Right? You have so much more expertise about this. Like, I feel like you're a library where you have this inventory of Latinx authors and texts, books that have come out in the last number of years. And I'm just so grateful for you and the way you're uplifting voices. And and really putting a spotlight on books and just the community, because it can be really hard. You feel like you're alone. Nobody's going to want to read these stories. Nobody's going to want to publish them. I had trouble publishing this, and I entered it to a contest at UMass Press, and it won the Juniper Prize. And so it wasn't the kind of, big five publisher kind of story. So, the publicity marketing is just on a smaller scale. Yeah, it hurts my heart too. Yeah, that there's way too little Central American literature yet. The stories are there, but we have to get them on the page. I'm dying to ask you, what do you see as the landscape of Latinx literature in general? That's a huge question. I guess, where do you feel hopeful about like the direction of books by Latinx authors?
I think in general, like it's difficult, right? Because, growing up, I guess starved is the good word, starved of, literature by your own culture. For a while, I was just so immersed in connecting to Mexican American stories and everything. And, thanks to being more active, I think on Bookstagram and in general on Twitter, and hearing, voices speak up and speak out about the lack of Central American voices that do exist. I mean, and not just in terms of books and authors, but also book reviewers. I think that's another important thing. When we talk about own voices, I love that publishers want to connect me to Latinx authors, but also I am not an own voice reader or reviewer for, a Central American book. So I think part of a huge thing that I'm feeling hopeful is seeing and being able to connect with readers that are, and being able to find ways to, create community, which is hard in itself. It's not an easy thing to do.
Yeah, definitely.
Especially on social media.
I know. Yeah, you make it look easy. I know it's not.
There's a lot I don't share. No, okay.
Yeah, no, it's a ton of work, and your posts are so beautiful, and you write like text to go with the post, and it's just the videos you're making, and this is all on top of your full-time work. I hope that, because right now it does seem to be work that it's like this invisible labor that we do on top of our day jobs, and but it's not invisible. Like, we need to make it visible, and it needs to be compensated. It needs to be valued. But I don't know. There's work to be done. I'm kind of turning that over and thinking how I can put my energy into something to help propel this initiative. Yeah.
I mean, and I think you're doing it with, the communities that you're building, and, you talk a lot about that in your book and your essay collection too, creating communities of writers, and finding yourself in a community that might be predominantly white, and writing and still writing. And so I was curious, like, in what ways that experience has helped you create your own communities. And I know a lot of friends on Instagram have gone to your workshop that you just hosted. And so that's so exciting. Could you talk about that?
Sure. I mean, it in the same way that you want to, as Toni Morrison said, like, write, if there's a book in the world you want to read that hasn't been written yet, then you need to be the one to write it. In the same way, if there's a writing workshop that doesn't exist yet, that you crave, that you need, then create it. Let's create it. There's great work that's already been done in that vein. VONA, Voices of Our Nation Arts Foundation, was huge for me. It was the Writers of Color Workshop, the Macondo Writers Institute. All of these communities have really helped me. The Boston Writers of Color Group through Grub Street. I wish I'd had them earlier, of course. And so now I really try to be vocal about the need for these spaces, and having it not be the case where there's only one writer of color in the room or one writer of color on the syllabus, but also now as an instructor and a professor of creative writing, it's an interesting dynamic. And again, more essays to write just about that role. Like, now I'm the one making the syllabus, and I'm the one facilitating the workshop. And it's fascinating to now be on that side, kind of. Gives me a lot to think about. Ooh, Jenny, can I answer this question?
Of course. No, I just saw it pop up. That's really cool, by the way.
I know. Yay, Jenny. Okay, let's see. So I have a YA novel, another one coming out in next year, 2022, hopefully summer, maybe fall. It's called Maya, and it tells the story of a 16-year-old girl in Guatemala, and she's an aspiring fashion designer, and she gets caught up with the maras, the gangs, and she and her mother have to flee in the dead of night for the Mexico-US border. And I wanted so much to write a story that provided a counter narrative to what's being shown in the news. And my early drafts and scenes were written with a lot of like politics and heavy-handed, and I'm so angry. So it took a while to find the balance, right? Of how do I tell a story that is going to have these elements, but not have it be so, too much sal, on the food. And or in Guatemala they say le echó mucho chile, so too much chile. So I think that for young readers especially, I'm excited for them to read this book because they can have access to, hey, this is what a teenager is like in Guatemala. Not every single teenager, but here's one, and they can connect on that level. And then through her story, learn more about Central America and the border and immigration, and maybe be called to take action and do something, So I'm really excited about that book because it's mostly set in Guatemala. And I never read a book like that, so it's exciting for me. And now I really want to write more essays. I feel like, I don't know, I have others and I'll just keep writing them, but we'll see how they land. Yes, to more essays. Oh, that's great. That's so encouraging.
Yeah, no, I definitely would like more essays. But, I am curious. I do want to ask, in terms of, I wouldn't say limited voices, but, not enough, right? Is there some kind of pressure you feel with, representing? Because sometimes I think what happens is when we do only get one single story, or, we only have a few writers that do make it, like, I do feel like sometimes there's a pressure on them that is like, to be representative of an entire community. And how do you write with that pressure?
Yeah,
I've asked this question because I, as a reader, am incredibly curious, but, to other people, so I'm really curious about you. How do you handle that pressure?
Yeah, definitely. I think what's helped has been to really focus on writing from my truth, and really not trying to represent an entire culture or group of people. Or Guatemala is so big and nuanced and rich and diverse, and I'm one person and my family's one family. And I think before I used to try to write like broadly, like a mile wide, and now I'm trying to write a mile deep, so that the specificity I can be universal by just telling my true stories. And when you write authentically into your story, it's like Sandra Cisneros, going back to that. She said that she wrote The House on Mango Street as a series of prose poems, as a series of vignettes, because she was so sick and tired of being in the Iowa Writers Workshop, and people telling her she wasn't doing it right. So she said she went back to her room and wrote pieces where nobody could tell her that she got it wrong. And that's how she wrote The House on Mango Street. She said, nobody can tell me that I got Esperanza wrong, that I got Salvador wrong, that I got, Minerva wrong. These are my stories. These are my people. And so she wrote I love that story, like the pulling the curtain behind the, how that book came into being. And so I think I try to do that with my work. How can I write in a way, not that there's not work to do, revision and all of that, but how can I write authentically into a space where, like with cleaning houses, like where you described, like sitting on the steps, on the stairs, and your mother singing. How beautiful is that? How poignant, and that nobody can tell you that you got that wrong. That's your experience, But if you were trying to say, like, all children of housekeepers in the 1980s and 90s, it's like, I don't know. It's a little bit, maybe I shouldn't say that. It's kind of journalistic. And for me, I'm interested more in stories, I guess, that aren't necessarily journalistic.
Right. And I think you're right in terms of it's a lived experience that no one else has access to but you, and you are accessing and processing so others can connect and read it. It's pretty powerful.
Thanks. So what are you excited about, like in the Bookstagram world?
I'm just excited and really glad to be able to connect with you and other authors, and I've had a chance to talk to some really awesome people that I really admire along, I think of you like in Brina Grande and Julia Alvarez and all these voices has been like, it's been a dream, honestly. Like it's been something that I unexpectedly I would never have thought that this would be a reality. So
really? Yeah. Oh, I'm going to cry. Just putting me in a sentence with them is like, what?
It's real. And they had a lot to say too. I think I asked Julia the same question, and her response was, she writes ahead of she's always trying to write ahead of her demons or whatever, naysayers or anything in her head, the doubts. And I thought that was incredibly, just like you said, instead of writing a mile, you're trying to write a mile deep in, which is something that is for people like me who want to someday maybe tell their story. I think that's incredibly meaningful,
Oh, so. Absolutely. I'm just like right now, please do that. And talk about a story through books. I could just see it right now. It could be like different books, different chapters, or like like micro essays. And the book shelf. I see the whole thing. See. In my spare time, I'd like to be an editor. I did edit Latinas before. Don't ask me where I'm from. Have I told you about this one?
No.
Oh my gosh, I can't believe it. So this is like my firstborn kind of, I guess, Wise Latinas, Writers on Higher Education. It was published in 2014 by the University of Nebraska Press. And this has an essay by Sandra, by Julia, Chantel Acevedo, Janine Capo-Cruzet, Blanca Torres, Stephanie Elizondo Grice. It's just Ruth Bahar. It's different Latina writers reflecting on their experiences in college, whether it's first gen or profesoras, or Ruth Bahar's whole story in there is like that she was appointed chair of her department, and it's like a big deal. And she called her parents, and her father was like, Ruth, habla algo de una silla, like she's talking about a chair. Like he wasn't he thought it was a physical, literal chair. And so it's just all these moments where the two cultures are colliding, and Tony Plummer has a piece in there. It's just, it's really great to have that compilation, because it's like a chorus, and I really wanted that when I went to college. So yeah, Daisy and I are doing an event about college. College access is one of my passions. It's so much to say. So I've always wanted to write a kind of memoir or something. I'm hoping that YA memoir picks up, because I kind of want like there to be true stories. I know there are some YA memoirs, but George Johnson, All Boys Aren't Blue, he has this beautiful book that he came out with this year. And I think young people need lots of books, but they can also benefit from some true stories, memoirs, in the same way that as adults we read memoir. But I don't know. We'll see.
Yeah. I mean, I think that, connecting and learning from other people's stories is definitely what kids would love to do. Yeah. So I'm conscious of time, and I know we're running out, and I don't want it to end, but
I know it feels like we're just getting started. It's so great. I just love. Oh, you're just the best. This is so great.
Oh no, thank you so much for talking to me, and Angela and the Word. I'm seriously, thank you so much for creating space for this conversation to happen.
Yeah. That's what it's all about, taking up space. Thank you.
This is, every time I do something with Lupita, it exemplifies what Duende is. And I think especially our Latinx community, but all of our community, to be able to be together in this space is wonderful. And I know we could all listen to you talk just all night. You're amazing. I think, white space is definitely going to be going on our perennial decolonize your mind list. I know, and Daisy, was it her memoir, A Cup of Water Under, but it inspired me to start Duende, to leave those white spaces in bookstores. And I remember we had this really wonderful conversation when I hosted her when I was working at Politics and Prose, and I was telling her, reading her book, I hadn't read anything like that, and it's funny because Lupita and I talk about, my first book was also So Far From God. Oh, because we're so over time. And it's really funny because it just, these things that connect us, and Ana Castillo is that connector for me too. I mean, I picked it up as a college freshman at a random Barnes and Noble when I was 18 in 1999. In North Carolina, because I was at school at West Virginia University, and it was a culture clash and not great. But so these books come to us, they're magic. They're what we need, and Jen, I'd love to talk to you more about the Central American literature thing too, because I know that's, as a Panamanian, it's always at the front of my mind as well.
Let's talk. Yeah. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, so we'll talk more. But thank you, Vinianka. Thank you to the Word. Thank you, Lupita. Thank you, Jen. Thank you to our wonderful community for coming out. This has been a fantastic night.
Oh,
yes, thank you, everyone. And as Angela said, you really exemplified everything that the Word is too. These conversations are exactly everything that's always on my mind. So thank you so much for sharing a bit from inside of yourself in this really messy space that we all are trying to find that space for our voice and our real voice.
Yes. Yeah. 100%.
Everybody, do make sure that you pick up White Space. Obviously, there's so much more to read here, and I hope that you all are seeing how joyous the applause is. Thank you all for being here today, and thank you both for being in this conversation.
Yeah. Go take up space, everybody.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Talk soon. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.